Welcome back. Professor Sachdeva, you were talking about Henry Kissinger and the very prudent advice that he has been giving to the White House about how the United States should see Russia's anxieties. So on that note, Ambassador Saha, if I could ask you perhaps to dilate on how do you think the US has handled Ukraine, and I would say the entire region, because going back to the era of President Bush soon after 9/11, there's this anxiety in Moscow that the encirclement by NATO is creeping further east towards the Russian borders. How would you characterize or assess the American initiative towards Ukraine?
I'd say two things. I was there in Kiev when the Georgia incident happened. Certainly the West was extremely unhappy with the actions taken by Russia in Georgia with respect to South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And they might have probably felt anxious that should this sort of thing happen to Ukraine, for example, a much vaster, much more important country which was a part of the former Soviet Union, then what would be its position?
And Ukraine had nuclear weapons at one time.
Ukraine had nuclear weapons, in fact a large stock, since it was a sort of frontline Soviet republic. A lot of the forces were located there, which they gave up under the Budapest Agreement. I happened to watch a program by Farid Zakaria last week where a contrarian view was expressed by Professor Cohen, who seemed to understand entirely the Russian position on Ukraine and said that, among other things, should Canada, for example, have taken a decision to have special trade relations with the Russians, would the Americans been very upset about it, especially if it was to the exclusion of trade with the US. And he was very clear in his mind that as far as Russia was concerned, it was entirely understandable the reactions that Russia had to this particular incident in Kiev, where the legitimately elected government of President Yanukovych was basically removed through what Russia continues to call a coup d'etat. So basically the West and in particular the US would be seen by Russia as following a different set of standards and expecting a different set of standards of Russia in a situation in which they feel with some justification as having great legitimate interest on their part, that should the same thing have happened in a region much closer to the US, the situation would have been dealt with. I think that captures the sentiment very clearly, that indeed Ukraine is extremely important for Russia, and therefore it would probably not be correct to say that Russia is interfering in an area that is of little or no concern to
the other side. But on this, Gulshan, this is actually a very, very complex case in terms of what are the principles that are being contested. Because if on one hand we talk about self-determination and apply it to the entire Ukraine nation, we also have what is happening in Crimea, where the Russian majority has voiced, shall we say, a certain preference. So how do you balance this? And for the United States, this whole question about to what degree do you support self-determination by one constituency within a multi-ethnic country? I mean, that has many ramifications. And the government of India has also, I think, taken a position where the NSA has made a statement to say that we recognize the legitimate interests of Russia in terms of what is happening. So, my reading would be the US is proceeding very cautiously. Would that be a fair sort of assessment about how President Obama is dealing with the situation?
Well, they are proceeding cautiously, not because they are worried about something else, but they are worried basically that they are already so tired for the all the fighting which is going on. I mean, they are part of so many in Afghanistan and other places. But legality issue. I mean, what happened in Kosovo, what happened in many other places. But when you are dealing with a superpower, then it's a different issue. But now when you are also dealing with another major power which also have a Security Council seat, then it's a very different ball game altogether. This is what I think West is finding it's very difficult to deal with this kind of situation, because so far in the last 10-15 years, in many of those cases, I mean, they were able to get away the way they wanted to deal with the situation. But now they are on the other side, where you have a situation where Russia is asserting, it's also raising certain legal issues, because when in the UN the debate was, I mean, there was debate on Ukraine, and the Russian ambassador, he brought a letter from Mr. Yanukovych. He said he is the elected legitimate president. So in that sense, he said we have a legal right to enter. At the same time, we also have, in that sense, protect interest of our Russian
But do you think
there.
the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council, would it be able to provide any kind of modus vivendi, given the fact that Russia is a directly interested party?
Well, I'm sure discussions could take place which might advance the process, but I don't think in terms of a final resolution that the Security Council is likely to play a part. That would have to come from discussions and negotiations between the West and Russia, and of course Ukraine, which is vitally involved.
And both Poland and Germany also are playing a very major role.
They would. I mean, Germany is probably the one country in Europe which is most vitally involved and has been so for a long time. Let me take this opportunity to convey a feeling that I sort of, over time, my 5 years in Ukraine, I came to recognize that while we talk of this pro-West and pro-Russia sentiment, I think it would be wrong to conclude that there is a sharp division and that someone is either pro-West or pro-U. I think an overwhelming majority of Ukrainians would want to be Ukrainian, and that even those who are believed to be
closer to Russia
would not wish to become
assimilated
by Russia, that they would want to remain Ukrainians with the right of being treated as equal citizens with everyone else.
It's very interesting on this that President Khrushchev himself was of Ukrainian origin.
Actually, he was of Russian origin. If you must talk about origins, he was of Russian origin whose political career and working career began, and for the most part, he reached the highest position in the Communist Party of the Ukrainian Socialist Republic.
So I think that would be fair to say that he was Soviet first and everything else second.
First, but he grew. I mean, he spent most of his working life.
But Gulshan, in the interest of time, let me put you on the spot, if I may, and say that if Ukraine does not lend itself to a resolution, March 16th, is when there's going to be a vote. Do you see that as some kind of a way out in giving an indication about, again, the aspiration of the citizens, and will that be accommodated between Kiev and Moscow and Washington?
No, I think what's going to happen, I don't think Russia has real serious intentions of taking Crimea away from Ukraine, because if that happens, then the whole the Putin's project of bringing the Eurasian Economic Union in place with already Kazakhstan and Belarus in, and some other Central Asians are planning to be part of that. I think that project will be totally abandoned. So and the kind of problem Ukraine is facing today, you have very serious economic problem which only Russia can't solve. It has to be solved together, working with the Europeans as well as with the international organizations. So only thing perhaps through this, what is Russia trying to say is that any solution, any stabilization of Ukraine is not going to take place unless Russia is part of that, which is what West was trying to do, immediately after the agreement. This is what they said, that now we can perhaps deal with the this space without Russia, and Russia has again come back through this, and through these pressures, whether through Crimea, whether through the ethnic linkages, is exerting its pressure, and at the same time would like Russia to come back in somehow in the fold of the Russian fold, which but again, Russia can't provide all the answers to Ukraine. It has to work with other international partners. This is what perhaps the future of Ukraine is, and that's what even Ukraine would like to have, linkages both with Russia as well as with the West.
Well, we can only hope that, notwithstanding the current turbulence and tension, that diplomacy will be able to provide some kind of a framework in which all the interests could be accommodated. Sunday, March 16th will provide us some kind of a cue about the manner in which Crimea will either be resolved or hopefully managed. This program will be back again on Friday. Thank you for watching. Good night.